So I figured I would take a quick moment and just mention a thing that came to light based on some personal experience as well over the past week. Um, there have been a couple of articles talking about how RSV has been quite prevalent and flu is seeming to be prevalent as well. Uh, I have some firsthand experience in speaking with some physicians with the wonderful Children's of Alabama, who indicated, yes, this is very much a thing. That RSV cases have skyrocketed recently. Flu is starting to skyrocket. The hospital here in Birmingham has actually quit accepting transfers from other hospitals. I'll include a couple of links as well, but overall, it's just a general mention that respiratory illness is a thing this year that we need to worry about. Maybe you've heard of other respiratory illnesses over the past couple of years. I don't know. But RSV has definitely picked up. The CDC has even issued some guidance about flu season kicking off and spiking earlier than normal. All that just to say, if you're the type of person that normally gets a shot for the flu, maybe think about getting it a little bit earlier than you normally do. That would be prudent in the wake of current information. And let's hope that we don't have a even worse Q4 for respiratory illness than what we've seen so far. That's kind of, in a nutshell, what I would leave it at. But I will include links for those people who want to dig a little bit further into the details.
I thought some of the details were interesting about this is the most severe flu season than we've had in the past 13 years.
Yeah, I could certainly talk about it for quite a bit. The biggest thing is I don't want to make it sound overly sensational because it's too early to know what this means for the rest of flu season, right? Maybe it's just the peak is hitting earlier than normal. Maybe not. Who knows?
I hope it's that.
I really hope that it's not a... There was one article that I don't intend to link, but there was one article that was talking about a potential trifecta of RSV, flu, and COVID causing just mass havoc and hysteria. And sure, maybe. But that felt sensational. And so I don't want to necessarily give a link to something that could be over-exaggerating it. Is flu a problem? Yes. Is RSV a problem? Yes. Is COVID still a problem? Unfortunately, yes. Let's take some basic precautions. Wash your hands. If you can at all cover your mouth when you cough, that would be great. We understand how respiratory illness spreads. Let's take some basic precautions and call it a day.
I think that if you're around the immunocompromised, let's not forget that we know how to use masks. Cover the nose, cover the mouth.
That is a good point. And I kind of jested a little bit about the whole, cover your mouth when you cough. If you're around the elderly and immunocompromised, those are populations that are still very much susceptible to everything in the world today. Flu is quite deadly among those groups. Mm-hmm. COVID, we know, is quite deadly among those groups. Just a couple of basic precautions. It's not going to hurt anything. And if you have not gotten a vaccine, maybe look into it.
I have said this since I heard you say it. It's like these are medical issues and they deserve a medical solution. And that actually works with the topic from last week. That's a medical and psychological issue, and it has a medical and psychological resolution or treatment or guidelines. So, same thing. There's a medical resolution.
Yeah, it's actually kind of amazing when you're talking about a particular thing and you seek guidance from experts on said thing, how positive outcomes suddenly become the norm.
Well, they didn't didn't wake up yesterday.
So I know in conversations that we've had, you had something you wanted to make sure we brought to light as well. And I wholeheartedly agree. It was just not something that was on my radar initially until I happened to hear about a snippet of it from you. Let's lead into that as well before we actually delve into our topic for the week.
Yeah, I wanted 2 shows ago I had mentioned, talked about what was happening in Iran, just a thing to mention. This is not a huge platform, but it is a platform, and if it's just one extra person that hears about this and thinks about this, there we go. That's one new person that is exposed to the topic. And I really wanted to, bring it up again, but right at the last minute I saw that the story had changed a bit. So it makes me think that, I kind of wanted to change the direction and how I wanted to talk about it. But on the 16th of October, so that's almost 2 weeks ago as we record, Elnaz Rekabi, an Iranian climber, was competing in the Asia Continental Championships, and she climbed without her hijab, and then she went missing for 3 days. And it made me think, people got really upset about her. It doesn't seem coincidental. Sorry, it doesn't seem coincidental that she went missing after climbing without her hijab for 3 days. And then she appeared on camera, apologized to state reporters for not wearing the hijab. She said it was a mistake. She specifically said it wasn't out of protest. She just forgot to put it on. I'm not sure if I believe that, but I understand why she might be saying that now. And I'm okay with that. She's got to live her own truth and make it up, or, make her decisions on how to address this. But there are reports now that she's under house arrest. So on one hand, it's good that social media and anyone who has a platform, no matter how big or small, are talking about this. They're talking about this issue. They're noticing things like this woman who went missing for not wearing her hijab, and that may have saved her life. Now, is the Iranian government still pressuring her to do something or punishing her? Maybe, but she is alive, and so that's good.
Yeah, and just to tack on, this includes, or this is tied to, I think we put it in the show. I actually don't know for sure if we put it in the show or if it was cut. But the conversation about just being in awe of how reactive Iranian's female population has been in lashing out against the regime as a whole and their treatment of women, and how fundamentally teenage girls have become the most potent weapon in that particular realm of discussion. That it's both remarkable and awe-inspiring if you really kind of pay attention to everything that means, right? Like it's easy for us to be jaded in the States about activism in a lot of arenas. But if you think about a country like Iran, where activism by a female population can very legitimately be met with death and a willingness to engage in said activism regardless of the consequences, it's awe-inspiring.
You say death, and it's like, how many people do you think have died?
Yeah, I would not even wager a guess. Go ahead.
I feel like if I hadn't read the statistic, I feel like my guess would have been like, maybe not more than a dozen. But there's a U.S.-based rights monitor called the HRANA, and they are they put the figure they put out was 233 have 233 protesters have been killed since the demonstrations started. That was more than I was expecting.
And that's 233 plus more than should.
Yes.
Let's just be unequivocally clear about that. No one should ever die for protesting an action. I mean,
however, if you were to break through the barriers and become violent and enter a space that you're not invited to enter, and you, especially if you're entering by force, you kind of give up some of those rights.
So
I don't know.
Not to take it on a tangent, but just to be clear, a protest is a nonviolent action.
That's right.
Once you cross the realm into violent action, it's no longer a protest.
Yep. Sorry, I didn't mean to steal your words. I put a link.
Go ahead.
I put a link for the notes. So it came from climbing.com. So I guess which is part of Outside Magazine. So
yeah, we're going to have a lot of links in this show. I've come to realize it's actually a link-heavy set of references this week.
Linky.
Yeah. So surprisingly, I did not have a general news article that prompted my desire to talk about this week's topic. I actually had to search out articles to talk about what I wanted to talk about, which is a nice change of pace. We've joked a little bit here and there about morality versus ethicality and using the terms wrong, having some fun with that. I actually wanted to delve into it a little more, not so much because of the debate between what's moral versus what's ethical, but I did happen across an article about strengthening your moral compass or ethical code, whichever way you kind of want to think about it, strategies for doing so that kind of struck a chord. And they struck a chord because of a particular set of things in my life personally that have kind of tested my resolve within the same general regard. And I don't want to turn around and take the episode down a personal bent. I can, for those interested, if you want to write in and we actually provide feedback and question some things, sure, we'll take it there. But absolutely. Absent that, this is, shameless plug for saying, if you provide feedback, I'll talk about it. If you don't, whatever.
I think at this point, you're 100% guaranteed to get your feedback talked about.
Maybe. We'll see. But overall, this is a fascinating topic as well, just from a general personal perspective. Everybody benefits from understanding what it means to make decisions in a morally sound kind of trajectory versus what it means to make decisions within a ethically constrained environment. We'll get into a lot of this as we discuss the topic, but it's one of those things that, to me, this makes a lot of sense for how do you be a better person. And that's kind of what made me want to discuss this on the show, because it's a very tangible item, if you think about it correctly, on how to be a better person day to day. And I don't know if you have anything you want to say before we delve into it. I have kind of an overview of setting the stage that I can go into as well. But from a high level perspective, I think it's beneficial for us to examine what we think to be moral and create our own personal set of ethical guidelines for governing our behavior. And for everybody, that's going to be a little bit different. I don't want to pretend that, there's a universal answer here. but it is something that's important, especially in the wake of the political climate that we're in, where all sorts of shit is being talked about that could be so ridiculously skewed in so many different ways. Like it's more important than ever to have some foundation from which to make decisions. And that's really what I want to kind of hit on for tonight's show. Do you have anything you want to say before we really dive into it, or does that do a good?
Yeah. It's a good abstract. I think one of the things I was thinking about was, I can't remember if it was the last show or the show before, or maybe even the one before that, but very recently I said something about, I don't even remember what the context was, but I mentioned criminal behavior, and you were like, you were very good to point out that basically anything you make a law against will classify as that thing as criminal behavior. And so it's not always a thing that we can go by. And a really good example is what we were just talking about a moment ago about Elnaz Rekabi not wearing her hijab. That's illegal, so in her country. So it's considered criminal behavior. But we will all agree that that should not be criminal behavior. If you want to wear hijab, wear hijab. If you don't want one, you should not be punished for it. So I'd like that you, in that moment that I was talking about that, and I used the term that way, you're like, let's be clear the difference between criminal behavior and I can't remember what word we ended up using.
Yeah, we were talking about the general idea of what it means to harm another, and so it's not necessarily criminal or non-criminal, but whether the intent is harmful or not harmful.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the full context of the conversation, or I would
neither do I.
But it was, I'm pretty sure it was the last episode, because it's very fresh in my mind from an editing perspective. So
okay,
it might be 2 episodes ago, but I think it was the most recent episode. If you're listening to this to us chronologically, check the last episode, see if that's where we talked about it.
111. The age of Bilbo when Frodo takes the ring. Okay, go ahead. Let's go. Let's go.
You are so going to make this be a tangential Lord of the Rings episode if you're not careful. So, in the primary article that I'm going to link is talking about 3 strategies to strengthen your ethical code from a psychology perspective. And before we actually get into those strategies, I want to mention kind of the 2 overarching ideas that make this interesting in and of itself. It's one, there was a fairly recent study finding that immoral behavior is often permitted or even encouraged in cases where the perpetrator of said behavior has been the victim of past unfair or unjust behavior, which makes sense. We tend to forgive or encourage a certain level of retribution or justified kind of attacking of our attackers' behavior. That doesn't change whether that behavior is acceptable or not. It just, overall, if you have been a victim, we tend to accept a certain amount of lashing out at those people you were a victim of. And then 2, there was another study very similarly that found people are not surprisingly lenient when it comes to loved ones or people who are important to them being either immoral or unethical in their behavior. And this particular one really is the one that struck a chord with me. And again, if you want details, write in, send us some feedback. Otherwise, that's the best you're going to get. But That one is the one that grabbed my attention because that's the one that I have a very direct personal relationship that triggered me thinking about these things and making a decision based on I'm going to call it moral code, ethical code. I'm going to use them somewhat interchangeably in this particular circumstance. We'll get into why they're not interchangeable, but for this particular thing, both were a part of the thought process. So it's probably a good idea for us to start with what exactly is the difference between something that is moral and or morally based or morally right, morally wrong, versus something that is ethically right or wrong. Do you agree?
Yeah, no, that's a really good place to start, because from time to time I'll refer to you as like, am I talking morals or am I talking ethics? It's like, from the context of what I'm saying, you know what I'm talking about. I just want to make sure I get the syntax right. So I think knowing it will help.
So before we even dive into the rest of it, let's make it pretty clear. Morals refer mainly to guiding principles. They could be opinions, they could be fact, but they guide behavior or choices out of a desire to do or be good. They are, if you think about why you make a decision to do something, and it's driven from a feeling of doing good or a desire to do good, that's what it means to be morally good. They are the basis for ethics. So doing something morally right, morally wrong is generally interpreted through what is accepted as right or wrong by the immediate social group that you are a part of. So there's definitely a social aspect to, if you do this behavior, are you viewed as right or wrong kind of thing, right? That's a good way to understand what it means to be morally right or wrong. Ethics are a very clear, very succinct interpretation of what you can and cannot do in order to be a part of a specific group. For example, lawyers have a code of ethics. Doctors have a code of ethics. Pretty much every profession is going to have some level of what is considered ethical behavior. And it's probably a good idea to illustrate the difference with a couple of examples of what can be morally right or wrong versus ethically right or wrong at the same time. So, good example, if you are a lawyer who knows that your client is guilty, you could morally say that your client is guilty and be right from a moral perspective, but wrong from an ethical perspective because you would violate client privilege confidentiality,
right,
which is a fundamental component of maintaining professionalism as a lawyer, right? So they're intertwined. They're difficult to separate, but it's easy to see where your desire to do good could be at conflict with your professional requirement to fulfill the duties of your job.
Yeah, it's like, on one hand, and I think this, I don't know if this is too much of a tangent, but on one hand, you want to, the right thing to do is to make sure justice is served. However, the way our justice system is designed, everyone is innocent until they're proven guilty, and you have the right to representation, and you have the right to be defended. And so it's very hard for a lawyer to create a defense if they are on the also turning you in.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that's tangential at all. Like it's, the way I like to think about it is that your decision from a moral perspective is based on your individual thoughts and how you interpret things and how you've been raised and how society places weights on things in general. An ethical decision is very clearly defined for you based upon the groups you are a member of. And that's fundamentally the difference between the two. If it's ethical, it's based on logical, rule-based decision-making. And if it's moral, it's based on interpretation and social weight, I guess is the way I would put it. Go ahead.
Well, I was just thinking about, like, if, in the example you gave, if the lawyer has a code of ethics that they are following, one of them being that you can't blab on that your client did a thing. At that point, if you did, would it now, because it is breaking an ethical code, would it now then become immoral? Where otherwise, if that ethical code didn't exist for that particular person, it would be, the moral thing to do would be to tell.
So, interestingly enough, and this is something that really does cause a lot of difficulty with understanding the difference between the two. There are plenty of decisions that could be moral and unethical, or immoral and ethical at any given time. So the example given, if you were a lawyer and you knew your client was guilty, you would still be required to defend them as best you possibly could based on the ethics of the profession and following that ethical code of conduct, and at the same time be committing acts of an immoral nature because you know the truth of what occurred. You want to do right, but you cannot because of the code of ethics that you have agreed upon for entering into and engaging in this particular profession. It's a bad situation if you think about someone who wants to do the morally right thing. At the same time, you could be doing the morally right thing and being unethical, and that's also problematic. But it's less problematic at the individual level and more problematic at the professional, societal level. And so you kind of take your pick on whether the individual should suffer more or if the profession or group should suffer more.
I'm not sure how to respond to that. It was good, but
yeah, the only reason I didn't take it further is because I felt like I was going to be rambling. But it was one of those things that how do you determine which is better to compromise, morals or ethics? That's really the heart of the question. And I think the answer to that completely depends on the individual.
I think it also, there's some social expectation that weigh in and dictate it. Because I think the social expectation with the lawyer is that breaking the code of ethics is worse than being what you would consider immoral by not telling, or not giving up that person's secret of whether or not they did it.
I would agree, because I think going to like the medical profession, I think it would be more egregious to violate a general code or understanding of morality or moral rightness than it would to violate your code of ethics as a doctor. Like I feel like it would be, maybe the better way to phrase that, I feel like people would be more forgiving of a doctor who violated their ethical code in pursuit of a morally right answer than a lawyer who violated their ethical code in pursuit of a morally right verdict.
Yeah, I think there's a whole thing with Dr. Kevorkian, and I expect that his services violated the Hippocratic Oath, which is a very old ethical code, and there have been really good arguments that have made, well, maybe that part of the code has been outdated and should be updated, because it can be argued that Dr. Kevorkian provided the care for his patients that they desired, and that was to control and gracefully leave the earth, in their time on the earth.
It really is a good example for a number of different reasons, but thinking about recent headlines and the general, I always hate to use attack, but that's what it is. It's a full-on assault on women's rights, right, that we've seen over the past few weeks. But thinking about that particular arena and what it means to do the right thing could very much be in violation of your code of conduct, depending on what region you are in and what laws apply to you as well. Especially when you think about, if I remember correctly, it was a girl in Ohio that had to cross state lines to get an abortion who was 13, 14, like very young.
I think it was even younger than that, but maybe 10. And it's like the worst possible things that could happen. It was like a product of some level of incest, and she was like 10 years old. It doesn't matter.
Right. And the whole point being like proper medical care would be to terminate the pregnancy and provide support. And that would be the morally right path. But it would violate a number of different things ethically based on the situation. And so it's not an area, or it's not a discussion where you can say either one is perfect, because they're far from being perfect. It's more important to recognize what is morally right, what is ethically right, and where they diverge.
It kind of makes me think of a line from a movie called The Big Chill, and public defender was asked how her career was going, and the thing she says, I just didn't expect him to be so guilty. But it was a case where she's like, she was burdened with, these people are guilty for things, but I can't, I defend them. So she was following her ethical code.
Yeah, I don't have a good follow-up to that.
And well, you could tell us about the 3 strategies you saw to strengthen your ethical code.
Well, I could, but before I do that, there's the one kind of personal addition to this conversation that I'll provide is that the choice to develop and adhere to a personal ethical code of conduct is something that everybody should do. And it is something that I guarantee you, if you decide to do, will be tested. I don't care who you are. I don't care what that particular code looks like. It will absolutely be tested. And it will probably be tested by those closest to you. All because we tend to want to overlook anything that would make that particular choice controversial or uncomfortable for those closest to us. And I mentioned that with one of the studies that was cited. Again, details will be in the notes. But there are 3 things that you can do. I really hate that phrasing. Let's actually change it. There are 3 key components to developing a personal ethical code that you have to take into account. And if you do, you can consistently apply those across the board, regardless of whether it's someone close to you or someone that you really care less about. One, you have to make sure that whatever you think is morally right or wrong is not ambiguous. It's very clearly defined in your head, and there is a definitive line that you could cross.
Mm-hmm.
Two, you have to be able to be comfortable with being the person to break the chain of maltreatment. You have to be willing to say, this is wrong, and it's not going to happen on my watch, or this is not something that's acceptable, don't do it again. If you are non-confrontational by nature, this is going to be your most problematic aspect of developing a core, fundamental ethical code that you can apply to everyone. Just very easily, this is the one that means you're willing to have that confrontation. And then three, when those particular things that you've decided are core components of your personal ethical code are challenged, you don't back down. You don't acquiesce on a subtlety or a nuance. You don't water down the strength of your convictions on that particular belief. You don't give a little just because of the interaction. For example, if you very strongly believe that everyone should be equal, no matter race, sex, gender, ideology, like hair color, eye color, it doesn't matter. Pick anything. If one of your core components of your personal ethical code is that everyone should be equal, if someone challenges that with something like a person with an earring in one ear versus two, right?
I think we talked about that recently.
Yeah. It sounds trivial, but you don't give in. There is no difference whatsoever. You have to be able to be willing to apply that particular component universally and not water it down, because that is where we really get into problems with I've been trying to avoid bringing labels into it, but I have to.
Yeah.
When you water it down, that's when you accept a particular label as being above or ignored by a particular component of this ethical code. And that can't happen. Either it exists or it doesn't. While the world in general may not be binary, an ethical code is.
Right, and there's certain things that you can force into a binary scenario that, based on context, but that's not for today.
Right. And morality does have a spectrum, but an ethical code does not. And that's the key takeaway here. If nothing else, you develop a personal code of ethics that you can apply day in and day out, and it is absolute and without any gray areas. Either you tolerate racist behavior or you don't. Either you tolerate slander or you don't. Either you tolerate lies or you don't. These are absolutes. And while overall absolutes are typically something you would want to try to avoid as best you can, when it comes to a code of ethics, any code of ethics is rooted in absolutes about what is acceptable and what is not. You can't have a general set of guidelines that has room for changing what is acceptable and what is not acceptable based on the person or the group of people or some other subjective examination of the source.
What about if you want to adjust your code of ethics because you've either got new information or, I don't know, let's just say for whatever reason.
It's a good question, because once you define a particular set of things that you are willing to draw this line in the sand, so to speak, that doesn't mean that it's not susceptible to change. The key aspect that a lot of people kind of overlook, what you believe to be morally right or wrong drive what you believe to be ethically correct or incorrect. As you change what you believe to be right or wrong, it's natural to reevaluate what is ethically correct or incorrect. Nothing is ever absolute and unequivocally unable to be changed. It's a personal decision. We'll go into the personal aspect very briefly for this particular thing. Me, personally, Jesse, cannot accept a person who wants to believe things that are unequivocally proven to be false as true in my life. Just can't do it. That is a line that I am not willing to bend or break, regardless of who it is. Those are the kinds of things that are choices from an ethically correct or incorrect standpoint, rooted in this idea that truth and honesty is the morally just path and what I want to see happen. If I were to change my general compass, if you will, for I want to see things that are morally just and maybe true kind of thing, it would change my decision on allowing a certain level of misinformation as long as it were rooted in fact. Quite simply, that's just stupid. Sorry if you believe that, but no. Any level of misinformation should be squashed, as far as I'm concerned. And I don't care who you are. If you want to peddle misinformation, there's no room for you.
I agree.
And that's the difference, right? Like I can make a rule, quote unquote, for how I interact with others that says, as long as you have some general level of factual basis that you drew a conclusion from that led to this, I can make an exception for it. I personally choose more of a hardline stance. That is the kind of thing that's going to be different person to person. That is what it means to develop an individual code of ethics that you're willing to both enforce and tolerate and accept.
What about if my code of ethics have been passed down to me from my parents, and upon an examination, they're not in a good place?
I don't know. That's an interesting thing to ponder. And the main reason I say that is because how much of my stubbornness surrounding my particular decisions might be passed along from my parents as well. The stubbornness of adhering to my decisions could be a bad thing overall, or maybe not. Maybe it doesn't matter.
There's a certain amount of principle that you have to live with, and there's a certain amount of principle that you have to hold yourself to continue to be a self-respecting human being. And so I think that line is different for every person, and especially there are going to be so much more lines maybe. So,
well, I know. So maybe not exactly what you're looking for, but I know the one big thing for me, how I have chosen to answer the question is, have my choices made me and those around me better, or have they harmed someone around me? And that's kind of where I leave it. We've talked many times about what it means to try to be better. And it's really an ethical choice as well when you get down to it, because you don't have to try to be better from a moral perspective. It's an active choice that you make to try to do better day by day. And for me, and with this particular subject, it's, one, am I causing harm to others? And two, am I causing some level of improvement in others? And if I can answer one as no and two as yes, then I'm on the right path. If I can't answer those unequivocally, then I need to reevaluate.
I really wanted to ask one more question, but that sounded so good.
Well, there's a pause there. I can certainly cut it, but let's ask the question.
Well, the thing that you keep coming back to is that harm. Is it harmful? Is it not harmful? And am I bettering those around me, or am I not bettering those around me? And two of those can sort of match up, and the other two match up with each other. But I think when you start talking about, does this harm? Does this harm anyone? Does it harm myself? I think that's a really good basis for creating an ethical code for yourself. And then maybe, your morality develops from there.
So it's funny, I would argue that. I would say whether it harms others is the basis for creating the moral guidelines that you would base your code of ethics on. And the main reason I would say that is because ethically, you might be in a profession where a set of actions could harm others, but it's a result of the choice of profession and not specifically what you want to see being the outcome. So if you go back to our lawyer example, right, you might know that your client is guilty and a non-guilty verdict is going to harm the victims of said crime, but because you are representing that person and you have adopted a particular code of ethics for the profession, it may not be in line with your moral choices, but you're bound to that particular chain of events based on your profession. So your professional code of ethics. Yes, it's a difficult situation to be in, but it's one that could very easily exist. And so you would be more likely to influence your personal development of a idea and guiding philosophy of what is morally right and wrong from that, not a personal code of ethics, so to speak.
Interesting. But as you described it, that it makes so much sense.
And it really goes back to what is ethical depends a lot on the memberships you have to different groups, whereas what is morally correct or incorrect depends upon the both individual perspectives and philosophies that you hold and the social groups in which you reside. And I paused there, but there's one other statement that I kind of want to make, and I don't know if it's going to sound good. So, what is morally right, what is ethically right, are both full of shit depending on the perspectives of the other side. You can be morally right from your perspective, or morally right from society's perspective, and at the same time, be morally wrong from another individual's perspective on the receiving end and morally wrong from another society's perspective.
Yeah, it's like when we think about women's rights to their body, for body autonomy. It's like there's one faction that is like, this is what you are doing is morally wrong, and I want to say that like most of society is saying, no, we're okay with this. It is not morally wrong. Here's why we believe that, and so forth. So, I didn't think about that.
Well, it's it's the ridiculous conundrum that is morality. We'd like to think that something that is moral or immoral is an absolute, and it's not. Morality is just as much a social construct as it is an individual perspective. And compounding that, ethics are based on morals, which means that ethics are both an individual construct and a social construct. But making it even more convoluted is that ethics can be a professional construct, which has no basis in the individual or society. And we like to think of these things as absolutes.
We have a number of different ways set up for you to get in touch with us to provide feedback, ask questions, or just comment in about something we've discussed.
You can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at untitled_hosts, or shoot an email over to untitled.hosts@gmail.com.
Or get in touch directly with Jesse at jthart.com, or get in touch with me, John, via telepathy.
If you would like to support our work or are interested in listening to our new after-show feed, head over to patreon.com/theUntitledPodcast and take a look at the options we have set up.
Thank you for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed the show.
And we hope to connect with more of you as we continue this journey.
That's a wrap.